I pulled into my parents' driveway earlier than planned on New Year's Eve, and what I overheard through that kitchen window shattered 9 years of marriage in seconds. My name is Helena Knight, and this is the story of how a single conversation on the last night of the year led to the quietest, most irreversible decision of my life. Snow was falling heavily as I drove through the quiet suburbs to the family home where we'd always gathered for New Year's celebrations. I'd wrapped up work early thinking I'd surprise everyone by helping set up before the guests arrived. The house was lit warmly, lights twinkling along the roofline, the faint sound of music drifting out. I parked on the street to leave the driveway free, grabbed the bottle of champagne I'd brought, and walked up the snow-covered path. That's when I heard my younger sister's voice through the slightly open kitchen window, clear and excited. "I'm 4 weeks pregnant, congratulations, you're going to be a dad." Then my mother's soft response. Finally, some good news for the family. A glass clinking, but no one correcting her. No surprise, no questions. I stood frozen on the path, snow gathering on my coat, the champagne bottle heavy in my hand. 9 years, married, countless tries for a child that never came, and now this. I didn't go inside. I turned around, got back in my car, and drove away, before anyone knew I was there. If I'd walked into that kitchen right then, everything would have exploded differently. But I didn't. Before you hear what happened next, if this story is already hitting close to home, please hit like, drop a comment below about a moment that changed everything for you in an instant, and subscribe so you don't miss how this one ends. Because sometimes the real story starts the second you choose to walk away. I drove aimlessly through the darkening suburbs that New Year's Eve, the snowflakes hitting the windshield like tiny accusations I couldn't brush away. My mind kept replaying the voices from the kitchen, pulling me back to that moment on the path, even as the miles added up between me and the house. Juniper's tone had been light at first, almost giddy the way she used to sound when we were kids, and she'd scored the last cookie. She'd said something about finally having something to celebrate this year, her words bubbling with excitement. Then my mother Grace chimed in softly, agreeing that it was about time the family had a reason to look forward. She mentioned how nice it would be to have the pitter-patter of little feet again, how traditions needed to carry on. It wasn't cruel, not outright. It was the kind of comment mothers make when they're trying to be supportive, but every word landed like a quiet judgment on the life I'd built. Owen stayed mostly silent at first, his voice low when he did speak, murmuring that things had a way of working out if you didn't push too hard. Juniper pressed him gently, asked what he thought would happen next, how he'd handle telling everyone. He brushed it off with a laugh that sounded forced even from where I stood outside, saying there was no rush, that some news was better shared when the timing felt right. My father Ulysses added only a couple of lines, practical as always. He talked about how men needed heirs, how biology didn't wait forever. He didn't raise his voice or say anything harsh. He just stated it like weather, like something everyone already knew. The clink of glasses came again, a small toast to the future they were imagining without me in it. No one called me barren. No one said I'd failed. They didn't need to. Every gentle phrase about continuing the family and good news at last carried the weight of everything we'd been through, the appointments, the negative tests, the years of hoping that never quite materialized. I remembered protecting Juniper when she was little, standing between her and the neighborhood boys who teased her braces. I remembered Grace praising Owen for being such a steady presence, how lucky I was to have found someone patient. I remembered Ulysses nodding approval when Owen fixed the garage door without being asked, saying he was the kind of man who stuck around. All those moments flashed through my head as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the road blurring through tears I hadn't meant to let fall. Why did it feel like they'd been waiting for this? Why did their voices sound relieved, more than shocked? The questions circled without answers, each one heavier than the last. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, trying to focus on the road, but the hurt kept rising, raw, confusing, impossible to name yet. It wasn't just the pregnancy. It was the quiet acceptance in that kitchen, the way they were already rearranging the family story to fit this new chapter. My chest ached with something deeper than anger, a grief I didn't have words for yet. The snow kept falling, covering the tracks I'd left behind, as if the night itself wanted to erase any sign I'd ever been there. I don't know how long I drove past familiar streets, turned strange in the dark, past neighborhoods decked out for the countdown that felt worlds away now. Eventually, the dashboard clock glowed close to midnight when I found myself pulling up outside Tatum Vale's apartment building downtown. My hands shook as I turned off the engine. I sat there a moment longer, watching the snow settle on the windshield, before finally stepping out into the cold and pressing her buzzer. Tatum opened the door almost immediately, her face shifting from sleepy confusion to concern, the moment she saw me standing there, soaked in melting snow, eyes swollen. She didn't ask questions right away, just pulled me inside, closed the door against the cold, and wrapped me in a hug that felt like the only solid thing left in the world. I collapsed onto her couch, the words tumbling out in fragments at first, then in a rush, I couldn't stop. I told her everything I'd heard through that window, the excitement in my sister's voice, the quiet approval from my parents, the way they spoke about the future as if I weren't part of it anymore. My voice cracked over and over, the story coming out messy and repetitive because I couldn't believe it myself yet. Tatum listened without interrupting, her hand on my back the whole time, only getting up once to make tea when I started shaking too hard to hold the mug myself. She didn't say things like, "That can't be true," or "They wouldn't do that." She just nodded, refilled my cup when it went cold, and let me talk until there was nothing left to say. When the sky outside started lightening with the first gray of morning, we were still sitting there, the apartment quiet except for the occasional car passing below. Tatum finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm, telling me I didn't have to decide anything tonight, that rushing into confrontation on a holiday would only give them the chance to spin it. She suggested sleeping a few hours on her guest bed, then thinking clearly once the world opened up again. I agreed, mostly because exhaustion had caught up and my body felt heavy as lead. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every word until they lost meaning. When I woke later that morning, Tatum had coffee ready and a notebook open on the kitchen counter. We talked through practical steps first, nothing emotional, just facts. I called Jeffrey Parker, the family attorney who'd drafted our prenup years ago when Owen and I got married. His voice was professional but kind when I explained the situation in as few words as possible. He advised waiting until after the holiday to file formally. Courts were slow anyway, but said he could start preparing documents quietly in the meantime. He reminded me the prenup was solid, especially with infidelity involved in most states, recognizing it as grounds for better terms. I thanked him, hung up, and sat staring at the phone longer than I meant to. Next came the harder call, Levi Knight, Owen's older brother. I'd only met him a handful of times at family gatherings, but I knew he worked as an independent investigator, mostly corporate background checks. When he answered, his tone was warm at first, wishing me Happy New Year, until he heard the strain in my voice. I laid it out plainly, no drama, just the facts of what I'd overheard. Silence stretched on his end for so long I thought the call dropped. Then he asked if I was absolutely sure, repeating the question twice, his voice tight. He reminded me this was his little brother we were talking about, that family loyalty ran deep. I understood the conflict in his words, didn't push. Finally, he sighed, said he'd look into some basic things, public records, maybe social media patterns, but warned it would be limited because blood made everything complicated. He promised discretion either way. I ended the call, feeling heavier, not lighter. Last I dialed Owen, forcing my voice steady when he picked up amid background noise of laughter and music. I told him I wasn't feeling well, had gone home early to rest, hoped everyone was having fun. His response was casual, almost distracted, said to take care, that they'd save me some food. No concern, no follow-up questions, just easy acceptance. I set the phone down and looked across the table at Tatum. We pulled out paper and started listing assets quietly: the house we'd bought together, retirement accounts, joint savings, even smaller things like who paid which bills. Every item felt like another thread unraveling the life I'd thought was secure. By the time we finished, the reality settled in deeper. I wasn't ready to confront any of it head on, not yet. The steps ahead looked clear on paper, but emotionally, everything still felt raw and unreachable. Levi's first email arrived while I was making coffee at Tatum's place. The subject line, simple: initial findings. I opened it with my heart pounding, expecting something definitive, but it was cautious, almost apologetic. He'd attached screenshots of a few old text exchanges between Owen and Juniper, pulled from public backups. Nothing explicit, just inside jokes and late-night check-ins that could mean anything or nothing. There were also reservation confirmations for a downtown hotel on dates that overlapped with Owen's work trips, but no photos, no joint bookings under both names. Levi explained in the body of the message that Owen had been careful clearing caches and deleting threads. He admitted straight out that pushing harder felt wrong to him, like crossing a line he wasn't comfortable with when family was involved. His tone was conflicted, ending with an offer to stop if that's what I wanted. I read it twice then, a third time, feeling a strange mix of relief and frustration. Part of me had hoped for irrefutable proof that would make the decision easy, but this gray area forced me to sit with the uncertainty longer. I replied thanking him for what he'd done, asking him to hold off on anything more invasive. On my own, I reached out to an old colleague from the clinic where Juniper once had routine checkups, someone I'd stayed loosely in touch with over birthday cards. After some hesitant small talk, she confirmed the pregnancy timeline from records she could access professionally. Nothing shared improperly, just enough to verify the dates matched what I'd overheard. It was clinical factual, and still managed to twist the knife. Digging further on my laptop that afternoon, I found public employment records showing Juniper had left her previous job abruptly after what was listed as a performance review. No details about misconduct, just a gap before her current role. There was no trail linking Owen to any cover-up, no transfers, no references from him. Just another loose thread that suggested something without proving it. I printed everything out anyway, spreading the pages across Tatum's dining table like pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a clear picture. Staring at them, doubt crept in stronger than before. Was I seeing patterns because I wanted to, or because they were really there? Had the conversation I'd overheard been twisted in my memory by shock? The questions looped until my head ached. I scheduled a video call with Jeffrey that evening, laying out the thin folder of evidence. He listened patiently, reviewing the documents I shared on screen. His advice was measured with what we had. Infidelity wasn't ironclad, but combined with the prenup language, it gave leverage for a quieter settlement. He recommended negotiation over litigation, faster, less public, less risk of things dragging out ugly. Public accusations without stronger proof could backfire, he warned, especially in a no-fault state where affairs don't always shift assets dramatically. I absorbed it all, asking about timelines, costs, worst-case scenarios. By the end, I felt more grounded in logistics, less carried by emotion. Still, when he asked if I wanted to proceed immediately, I hesitated on camera. The weight of finality hit hard. I wasn't there yet. I told him to draft the initial petition but hold off filing until I gave the word. He understood, said these things took time to feel right. After the call ended, I closed the laptop and sat in the dim light of the living room. The evidence wasn't overwhelming, and that lack of certainty made everything harder. No dramatic smoking gun, just enough fragments to know something was deeply wrong. I had to decide how far I was willing to go on incomplete truth and whether living with ambiguity was worse than forcing clarity. The draft papers arrived by secure email later that night, a clean document outlining division of property, no accusations beyond irreconcilable differences. I opened the attachment, scrolled through pages that reduced 9 years to bullet points and percentages. My cursor hovered over the signature line for a long while. I didn't sign. Not yet. I finally gave Jeffrey the go-ahead to file, but only through standard service, no dramatic scenes, no process server at work events. He assured me it would be discreet papers delivered to the house like any other legal notice. The process server showed up on a quiet weekday afternoon, while Owen was home alone. Tatum got the confirmation text from Jeffrey first, then forwarded it to me with a simple thumbs-up emoji. I was at my desk in the temporary home office I'd set up at her place, staring at the notification longer than necessary. My phone lit up almost immediately with Owen's name. I let it ring out, then listened to the voicemail. He left, his voice unsteady, asking if this was some kind of mistake, saying we needed to talk before anything went further. There was panic underneath the calm. He was trying to project the first crack I'd heard in years. I didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the message to Jeffrey, who replied that all communication should now go through him. The news spread slowly through the family grapevine, the way it does in tight circles. Grace called the next evening, her voice thick with tears, asking how I could do this to everyone, how I was tearing apart what we'd built. She spoke about happiness being fragile, about giving second chances for the sake of harmony. I listened for a minute, then ended the call, politely saying I wasn't ready to discuss it. Ulysses followed with a long text thread the morning after, careful words about family legacy, about how rushing decisions rarely ended well. He mentioned traditions we'd all grown up with, the importance of working through hard times together. No anger, just that steady pressure to reconsider, wrapped in concern. I read it twice, felt the familiar pull of obligation, then set the phone face down. Juniper stayed silent. No calls, no messages, nothing. Whether from guilt or strategy, the absence spoke louder than anything she could have said. At Owen's office, whispers started circulating when he took unplanned days off, showing up late or leaving early. Colleagues noticed the change in his focus, the way he avoided small talk. Nothing explosive, just enough for questions to form in hallways and break rooms. Juniper's workplace felt the ripple too. Rumors about personal issues led to her hours being cut back. Managers citing budget caution, but everyone knowing better. The shifts were subtle, not firings, just gradual distancing that made daily life harder. I felt the pressure building from my own side as well. Old family friends reached out with careful messages, asking if everything was okay, offering to mediate. A cousin I'd always been close to left a voicemail suggesting coffee to hear both sides. Each contact chipped at my resolve, stirring guilt I'd thought was buried. Nights were the worst, lying awake, wondering if I was overreacting, if privacy would have been kinder than this slow unraveling. Tatum reminded me gently that their discomfort didn't mean I was wrong. She pointed out how quickly they'd circled to protect their version of events, how little space they left for my feelings. Still, the doubt lingered, making simple decisions feel heavy. I stuck to routines, work calls, walks around the neighborhood, meals with Tatum to keep from spiraling. The legal side moved steadily. Discovery requests exchanged, asset lists, compiled, mediation dates proposed. Jeffrey kept me updated in measured emails, shielding me from direct negotiations. Then came the first formal response from Owen's attorney, a polite letter routed through Jeffrey requesting a private meeting between just the two of us to clear up misunderstandings before things escalated. It was framed as reasonable, almost conciliatory, suggesting neutral ground like a coffee shop we'd once frequented. I read the proposal several times, imagining what he might say, how he'd explain. The temptation to hear him out tugged hard, promising closure or at least answers. But something held me back, the memory of that kitchen conversation, the way futures were planned without me. I discussed it with Jeffrey, who advised against it strongly, saying separate counsel existed for a reason. Tatum agreed, warning that face-to-face could reopen wounds without changing facts. I sat with the idea for days, weighing curiosity against self-protection. In the end, I instructed Jeffrey to decline the meeting, keeping everything channeled through professionals. The response went out formally, all discussions to remain in writing or scheduled mediation. Owen's side accepted without pushback, at least on paper. The ripples continued spreading outward, quiet but persistent, reshaping relationships in ways that felt permanent. I navigated them one at a time, learning to set boundaries without apology. The pressure didn't vanish, but it started feeling less like a weight and more like evidence I was moving forward. Jeffrey forwarded Owen's initial settlement counteroffer shortly after, a starting point that surprised me with its fairness on the surface. But reading between the lines, it still avoided acknowledging anything beyond growing apart. I marked sections for discussion, knowing the real negotiations were just beginning. The divorce process dragged on longer than Jeffrey had initially predicted, mostly because Owen's side requested extensions for document reviews and additional discovery. Each delay showed up as another email in my inbox, polite but frustrating, pushing hearings back week by week. I kept busy with work projects to fill the waiting, but the uncertainty wore on me in quiet ways. Juniper, under increasing stress as her due date approached, apparently confided in a close friend from the church group our family had attended for decades. She mentioned the upcoming baby as happy news during what she thought was a private conversation. That friend told someone else, who mentioned it to another member, and soon the story circulated in hushed tones during coffee hours after service. No one confronted my parents directly. Instead, invitations stopped coming. Grace wasn't asked to chair the annual charity drive she'd led for years, and Ulysses found himself left off the community planning committee he'd served on forever. People still nodded politely in passing at the grocery store or neighborhood events, but conversations stayed surface-level, excuses made to end them early. The chill was subtle, the kind of social distancing that happens in small, interconnected circles, without anyone ever saying the uncomfortable thing out loud. A few old acquaintances reached out to me personally, texts or voicemails asking if I was okay, offering vague support or suggesting prayer chains. I read them, felt the pull to respond, but ultimately let them go unanswered. Explaining would mean reliving it all, and I wasn't ready to justify my choices to people who'd known us as a couple for years. I drafted a short letter instead, printed copies for Grace, Ulysses, and Juniper. It was straightforward. I needed space to heal, so I wouldn't be in contact for the foreseeable future. No accusations, no details, just boundaries stated clearly. I mailed them from a post office across town, then blocked the numbers I'd memorized since childhood. Owen tried once to approach me in person outside the courthouse after a preliminary scheduling conference. He waited by the steps as I came out with Jeffrey, looking thinner than I remembered, hands in his coat pockets. He started with my name, voice low, asking if we could talk for 5 minutes. Jeffrey stepped forward smoothly, reminding him that direct contact violated the current guidelines. I met Owen's eyes, briefly shook my head, and kept walking. The rejection felt final in that moment, though part of me wondered what he might have said. My own struggles surfaced more during those stretched-out months. Sleep became unreliable, nights spent staring at the ceiling, mind racing through what-ifs and alternate scenarios. Mornings brought fatigue that coffee couldn't fix, concentration slipping during meetings until I had to take short leaves to reset. Work performance dipped noticeably. My manager noticed, offered flexibility, but the shame of not being at my best added another layer. Tatum stayed steady through it all, cooking simple dinners when I forgot to eat, sitting with me during the worst evenings without pushing for conversation. She reminded me often that choosing distance didn't mean the pain would vanish overnight, that grief for lost family worked on its own timeline. Her presence made the apartment feel less temporary, more like a real refuge. I leaned on small routines to rebuild structure, early runs when I could manage them. Journaling fragments of thoughts, therapy sessions I finally scheduled after months of putting it off. The counselor helped unpack the layers. Betrayal from Owen was one thing, but the rupture with parents and sister cut deeper, touching old insecurities about belonging. Progress came in increments, not breakthroughs. Some days the anger flared fresh. Others brought unexpected sadness for the version of family I'd believed in. Mediation sessions finally happened in a neutral conference room downtown. Owen attended with his attorney, keeping interactions professional across the table. We negotiated divisions point by point, furniture accounts, the house we'd poured savings into. Compromises emerged slowly, neither side getting everything wanted. The judge encouraged settlement to avoid trial, and eventually terms felt fair enough to accept. Signing the final agreement brought no dramatic relief, just quiet acknowledgement that this chapter was closing. Packing up the house happened over several weekends. I sorted through years of accumulated life photos left in boxes for later decision, kitchen items divided practically. Friends helped load the moving truck, Tatum directing traffic with her usual efficiency. The new apartment was smaller, in a different neighborhood, with taller buildings and more city noise. Unpacking took time, each box opened revealing memories I wasn't ready to display yet. I hung only essentials at first, bedding work set up, a few plants Tatum gifted for new beginnings. The space felt foreign initially, echoes louder without familiar creaks. But gradually it became mine, shelves, arranged my way, routines established without consulting anyone else. Standing in the empty living room after the last box, I realized the move marked more than an address change. It was the physical act of separating lives that had intertwined for nearly a decade. The exhaustion from carrying furniture upstairs finally caught up, sending me to bed early that night. Sleep came deeper than it had in months, dreamless and restoring. The final decree arrived in the mail on an ordinary Tuesday, the envelope plain and unremarkable among bills and advertisements. Jeffrey had called the day before to confirm everything was signed by the judge. No appeals, no loose ends. I kept the house as primary residence along with the bulk of my retirement contributions, thanks to the prenup's clear language. In exchange, I conceded some joint investments and a portion of the equity to avoid drawn-out appraisals. It felt like a balanced trade, not a victory clean enough to move forward without resentment festering in courtrooms. Owen retained his job, though word filtered back through mutual contacts that he'd been shifted to a less visible role, with reduced responsibilities and pay. The company cited restructuring, but everyone understood the timing. No dramatic firing, just a quiet demotion that limited his visibility and growth. Juniper gave birth at the county hospital, a healthy boy delivered without complications. She qualified for public assistance programs, WIC vouchers, Medicaid coverage, subsidized housing waitlists. She moved back into the family home full-time, the suburbs quieter now with fewer visitors dropping by. Grace and Ulysses maintained surface involvement in their circles, still attending services, still recognized in the neighborhood, but the energy had shifted. Committees filled without consulting them, events planned around their usual input. They adapted by scaling back, focusing on home and the new grandchild. The house that once hosted lively gatherings now felt subdued, routines centered on feedings and naps. I heard these updates in fragments secondhand from distant relatives or online glimpses I couldn't quite avoid. Each piece of news brought mixed reactions, relief. They were managing sorrow for the distance that made it all feel like someone else's life. My own adjustment wasn't linear. Some evenings regret surfaced sharply, wondering if I'd acted too decisively, if more conversation could have preserved something worth saving. Other mornings, self-blame crept in. How had I missed the shifts in dynamics, the small exclusions that added up over time, the questions circled without easy answers, pulling me into loops I had to actively break? I joined an online support forum for women, navigating divorce, lurking at first, then posting anonymously about the family betrayal aspect. Reading similar stories helped normalize the grief. Responding to others built quiet confidence. Gradual immersion in those threads provided perspective I couldn't find closer to home. Work became anchor and challenge combined. Projects demanded focus I sometimes struggled to summon, but completing them brought proof I could still function capably. Colleagues offered subtle accommodations, flexible deadlines, check-ins disguised as coffee chats. I leaned into promotions that opened shortly after channeling energy into new responsibilities. Success there felt earned, separate from the marriage narrative. Friendships shifted too. Some couples we'd socialized with faded naturally, invitations drying up. Others reached out individually, careful not to take sides. Tatum emerged as the constant planning low-key outings, listening without judgment, celebrating small milestones like finishing a book or trying a new recipe. Her apartment, then mine, became spaces where silence was comfortable laughter, genuine. I explored interests long postponed: weekend hiking groups, cooking classes, volunteering at a local animal shelter. Activities filled calendars without pressure, reminding me life held dimensions beyond what I'd lost. Therapy continued weekly, unpacking layers of family expectation versus personal choice. The therapist noted progress in how I spoke about the past: less raw anger, more acceptance of complexity. Not forgiveness exactly, but release from carrying their versions of events. Solitude grew less frightening. Evenings alone with music or a podcast no longer echoed emptiness. They offered peace. I learned the difference between lonely and alone, embracing the latter as strength. Financial independence solidified budgets, balanced emergency funds, rebuilt future plans sketched without compromise. The house once shared became fully mine: walls repainted softer colors, furniture rearranged for flow. It transformed from relic to sanctuary. No grand triumphs marked the path, just accumulated days where pain receded farther into background. I stopped checking for updates about them, redirecting curiosity inward. What did I want next, unrelated to reaction or revenge? The question opened possibilities I'd forgotten existed. Tatum hosted a small gathering for my birthday. Close friends, simple food, no mention of anniversaries past. Laughter filled rooms easily, conversations flowing into late hours. Driving home that night, windows down to summer air, I felt the shift clearly. The worst waves had passed, leaving calmer waters. Not healed completely. Scars remained tender sometimes, but navigable. I could breathe deeply without bracing for the next blow. The realization settled gently: the deepest hurt was behind me, processed enough to no longer define forward motion. Life continued, quieter in some ways, richer in others. I was okay, truly, steadily okay. 1 year after that fateful New Year's Eve, I wheeled my cart through the familiar aisles of the neighborhood grocery store on a routine Saturday morning. The place was moderately busy, families stocking up for the weekend, soft music playing overhead. I rounded the corner into the produce section and paused. Juniper was there, pushing a stroller, slowly examining apples with one hand while steadying the handle with the other. She looked worn, hair tied back hastily, posture slightly slumped, the kind of fatigue that lingers long after sleepless nights. The baby was awake, gurgling softly, chubby cheeks and curious eyes taking in the bright lights. She glanced up and saw me. Her face registered surprise first, then something softer, almost pleading. "Chioi," she started, voice trailing off, barely audible over the store noise. No follow-up, no explanation. Just that single word hanging between us. I didn't step closer. I stood where I was, taking in the scene, the sister I'd once protected fiercely, now navigating motherhood alone in many ways. The child stirred, reaching tiny hands toward a display. I felt no rush of bitterness, no urge to confront. Instead, a quiet clarity settled. I spoke calmly, words measured. "I've forgiven already. But not for you. For myself." The sentence landed softly but firmly. I turned my cart and continued down the aisle, selecting items as planned. She didn't follow or call out. I didn't glance back. The encounter lasted seconds, yet it marked the end of something I'd carried longer than necessary. In the time since the divorce wrapped up, I'd shaped a life that fit me better than the old one ever had. Days began with sunlight through my own windows, coffee brewed exactly how I liked, no negotiations over temperature or timing. Work evolved into something fulfilling, leading teams on projects that mattered, recognition coming from effort rather than endurance. Colleagues became allies in new ways, collaborations built on mutual respect. Evenings offered choices, quiet reading on the couch, video calls with friends across states, or spontaneous drives to nearby trails. The online community I'd joined stayed a resource threads where women shared victories small and large, from first solo vacations to mastering finances alone. Posting there less often now, but reading still grounded me when old doubts surfaced. Tatum remained the closest confidant, weekend brunches turning into tradition, honest talks about everything from career moves to dating hesitations. She celebrated my independence without pity, pushing me toward experiences I'd delayed for years. I tried pottery classes on Tuesdays, found joy in shaping clay with my hands. Volunteered weekends at the shelter, walking dogs that reminded me unconditional affection existed outside human complications. Travel plans materialized: short trips to coastal towns, longer ones to mountains I'd always wanted to hike. Photos filled albums of places visited alone, proof that company wasn't required for adventure. The house transformed gradually: fresh paint in calming tones, art chosen for personal meaning, garden beds planted with herbs and flowers. Spaces once filled with shared history now echoed my preferences only. Financially, stability grew: investments monitored closely, savings allocated for future freedoms. No more joint decisions, every choice mine to make or adjust. Social circles realigned naturally. Some acquaintances drifted, uncomfortable with the changed dynamic. New connections formed through classes, work events, community activities. Invitations came for gatherings where I arrived solo and left enriched. Dating entered tentatively: coffee meets conversations, testing compatibility without rush. Nothing serious yet, but the openness felt liberating. Therapy tapered to monthly check-ins, focusing on maintenance rather than crisis. The therapist highlighted how my language shifted past tense, for pain, present for growth. I acknowledged the betrayal's impact without letting it dictate identity. Family updates reached me, rarely filtered through neutral sources. No direct contact as intended. The boundaries held firm, protecting the peace I'd cultivated. Reflection came in quiet moments. Gratitude for the strength discovered, acceptance that people change in ways we can't control. The scar from that night remained tender on occasion, but no longer open. It served as reminder rather than restraint. Life's rhythm now felt authentic, paced by internal compass, not external expectations. Simple pleasures amplified: fresh bread from the bakery, evening runs along lit paths, books that transported completely. The realization deepened gradually. Peace wasn't absence of conflict, but presence of self-assurance. I no longer measured days by what was lost, but by what was gained in autonomy. For those listening to this story, the takeaway isn't about others facing consequences. It's about recognizing when relationships, blood or chosen, diminish rather than uplift. Betrayal from closest quarters teaches that loyalty isn't owed blindly. Wounds from family run deep because foundations shake. Healing requires distance, sometimes permanent boundaries, non-negotiable. Accepting human gray capacity for love alongside harm frees you from needing perfection. True forgiveness releases resentment's hold on your future, not their accountability. It allows forward motion unburdened. Revenge, if it exists, lies in thriving independently. Building a life so aligned with your values that past chaos loses power. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival evolved into strength. The calm I live in today stems from that choice repeated daily, reinforced through action. Not because they suffered not as payback, simply because I decided my well-being mattered most. And it does.